I had an experience working for a company where both their TA and HRBP functions were just all numbers. And it was so detached and impersonal. And I struggled because I was always trying to figure out the deeper why. It was so irritating because they were like, well, dude, what is a number? Hey, dreamers. Welcome back to the Dreaming Forward podcast. So, as you know, this month we're going to be discussing people, culture, and inclusion, which is a hybrid discipline that I have coined much through the work I describe in my book, Evolution to Equity. I'm holding on to the book because there's a particular part that I'm going to be reading from, but I just want to start with introing our conversation for today. Today, we are going to be discussing the people aspect of people, culture, and inclusion. Now, here's the deal. People has become a popular term, especially for startups and small businesses, to describe human resources work. The heart of how folks approach it, to me at least, as a practitioner and a thought leader, has not changed much. And that's a problem to me. So when I am talking about people work, I'm describing both the phrasing of how we describe human resources now, again, as people work, but I'm also speaking of it aspirationally from how I hope that the work evolves over time. When you are describing human resources, you are talking about one of two approaches. You can either approach it from the lens of the employee life cycle, or you can approach it from the lens of HR's functional areas. So there are 6 phases in my model for the employee life cycle, and then there are 12 functional areas to HR. Let's start with the life cycle. I love describing the employee life cycle model. I have worked at some of the largest companies in the world, trained their leaders. I have had clients at companies large, small, across the world. And I think maybe only 20% of my clients have heard of the employee life cycle. I was shocked because the employee life cycle pretty much guides all of the HR activities that we do. And this is one of those things where it's hard for us to make informed decisions when we don't understand the concept. So again, the employee life cycle has 6 phases. They are attraction, selection, onboarding, development, retention, and separation. They move you from when you first get introduced to a brand and a role, all the way through when you transition out of that role, either through voluntary resignation, termination, outplacement, or even reduction in force or layoff. The cycle repeats itself, so you recycle for every role. So let's say you are working as a coordinator and you are going out for a promotion to a people manager. Your employee life cycle starts over because they are having you in the attraction process to go for that new role. You go through the selection process for the role, you're onboarded, etc. Even that little bit of information shocks people because I think we normally approach human resources work from the lens of once you in there, and then you're just kind of hovering between development and retention. But again, that's not true. Every time you get a promotion, demotion, you make a lateral move, your life cycle starts over. The employee life cycle is particularly important for employees to recognize because there are certain key actions and key interventions that you need to thrive in each phase of the life cycle. What you need when you're in the selection process is completely different than what you need in the retention phase of the employee life cycle. And I think as leaders, again, we get very formulaic, especially when we have larger teams, and that kind of transition into the conversation about org development. But each employee, first of all, could be in a different life cycle phase, and 2, they might need very different things to thrive there. So if you are an employee and you are looking to grow your capacity to self-advocate, I would strongly encourage you to think about which phase of the life cycle you're in, what makes you feel a sense of belonging, accomplishment, and visibility for that phase, and begin to tease those concepts to your manager so that you can find mutually beneficial solutions. So let's talk about each of the phases. The attraction phase could include everything from when somebody tells you about a job that's available in a company, all the way leading to when you actually apply for the role, right? So everything between that first notification, that first introduction, up until the point where you are introduced to the selection process, that's attraction. And that's the same thing as when you are being wooed or flirted with by someone you're interested in. You want to feel seen, you want to feel heard, you want to feel a sense of pride, you want to feel a sense of a little bit of chase, you want to be desired. And I think that this is where a lot of companies don't realize they failed, because I can think of a few jobs where folks went hard to get this one particular person that they loved and wanted to work at the company or wanted to be on that team. And there was so much resentment from other people on the team who didn't get that same level of like white glove concierge attraction experience. As a leader, you have to understand your own biases, um, because typically the role that we go the hardest for in the attraction phase is the one that will soothe and stroke our ego the most. So if that's the hire that's going to make our work a million times easier, or if that's the hire that is going to make us look really good for being able to poach this star candidate in the, whether it's a thought leader in the field or whatever the case may be, we will go the distance. Roles that feel like grunt work to us and aren't as important, maybe even it might include a person we don't like, and we treat that like it's nothing. And that initial feeling doesn't go away. Most people know how long they're going to stay, even at the attraction phase. Because we're coming to work sometimes just because it's a right now job, sometimes because we just want that on our resume. And how you treat people during that process is going to be a make or break point. Moving on to thinking about the selection process. There's another one where, in HR, and I'm going to put the book down for this one because this is about to get a little ugly. We have worked so hard to make these selection processes easy on us as hiring managers. So how can I quickly get somebody on board with the least amount of pushback from HR or from my leadership, the quickest timeline, and with the least risk of potentially being sued later? Because yes, that is consideration. But we haven't always thought about the quality of the overall experience. How much joy and delight do we include in the selection process? How excited do we make people feel about being able to meet with us? It's deeper than just sending them cool swag. It's deeper than just making sure that we show up on time or that we use the same selection or interview questions for each candidate, or that we have the right mix of folks on the interview panel. It is about how do we want to feel throughout the process, and how do we want the candidates to feel? Because at least one of those people is going to end up being your new teammate. And if we have drugged people through the mud or jolted their feelings, if we have wooed them more than we know we can actually produce when they come on board, we are setting ourselves up for failure. Which leads to onboarding is not a one-day event. It's not just orientation. It's not just making sure that they sign up for benefits. It's not just making sure that they sign the NDA or that they are registered in the portals. It is the experience of making someone feel comfortable maximizing their productivity in a role. And that can take anywhere between 3 and 12 months. I will never forget one of my favorite mentors from when I worked with the Walt Disney Company. We had a sit down meeting, and this was fairly early into my tenure with the company. And I remember, first of all, the building that we met at, it was very prestigious. Like, you didn't even come to that building unless you had business there. And I was like, oh my gosh, I get to go meet with this person in this building. And I've heard so many amazing things about them, and they're so amazing. And we sat down and we talked, and they told me about their background, and I was talking to them about mine, and there was so much alignment, and there was like so much celebration of things that I accomplished and talking about my ideas, and they were really excited. And I'll never forget, they told me, they said, be new as long as possible. And I was like, be new as long as possible. Because my thing was, I got to hurry up and make some wins and hurry up and get my mark. And they said, this is a huge company that it could take you years to figure out. So while you still have the chance to be new and make mistakes, and people will forgive you and they'll let you kind of fail forward, be new as long as possible. And they were so right with that advice. 2 points I want to bring out about that as it relates to making a great onboarding experience. The first is the power of place. And this can you can leverage this whether it is an all remote company or whether or not you work at a company that takes a lot of pride in its campuses or building design. Where you onboard people makes a difference. So when you get the chance to onboard someone and bring them to a historic part of the campus or to the special conference room or to so and so's office for the first meet and greet, you give that person a sense of importance and belonging that is hard to recapture. If you can nail that part, you have done like half of the work. Because again, and just to stick with the Disney example, so when you do, at that time at least, if you're in the Burbank area, you get onboarded on a studio lot. You go to orientation to the studio and you go, around and see all the statues and it's like basically Disney's Hall of Fame. I can't think of what the actual name is, but it's where all of the people who have had a significant impact on the company, they get like this special plaque put on the thing. And then it's a Mickey Mouse statue, and then it's a statue of Walt Disney. You could sit and take pictures, and then you go have lunch in the studio. I mean, it was like all the things. And I just remember thinking, like, I want a Disney studio lot. Is this a joke? And I remember thinking then that from day one, I felt like I was a part of the company. I remember another job I worked where there was remote onboarding, but I ended up starting with a team meeting. So it was the team meeting with all of my peers and getting a chance to laugh and joke and build little inside jokes and fun stories with them. It made me feel like I fit in there. Those types of experiences are the beginning of building the team. Your team is going to fundamentally change with every new person that you bring into it and with every person that leaves. And so the more you create opportunities as a leader, as a people manager, for folks to build that connection, the deeper of a sense of belonging folks will feel, and then they'll start to find ways to be productive. Next, we have development. And so development, it starts to overlap with onboarding around probably the 9-month mark. Development is important because by the time someone gets to the development phase, they should have knocked down a couple of wins. Knocking down a couple of wins early is how you figure out, as the manager and as the employee, where it is going to be useful to develop. So let's say this person is going to be responsible for a lot of reporting, and you notice that the reports are very thorough, beautifully designed, but they are late. You now know we want to work on the time management piece. It is not of any benefit to try to find ways to develop the design. So this is where we get into micromanagement and nitpicking. We only really want to focus on time management, and we want to continue to boost up the parts that are good. Conversely, we also want to start thinking at the development piece about, well, what would a stretch assignment look like? The key to the development phase is to not stretch people beyond what you know they're capable of. I think sometimes as managers, we develop based on what we need and not what we negotiate with the employee. And that sets everyone up for failure. So when you're in the development phase and you're thinking about stretch projects, areas of improvement, and areas of recognition and reward, be very clear about how distinct each of those 3 categories are. Sometimes we have too much enmeshment and overlap there, so we get criticized for the same thing that yesterday we got celebrated for, which is the same thing that you want me to do more of. And that level of confusion doesn't help anybody, because when we come around to performance review time, there's really no clear measurement, which leads to retention. When you flub up onboarding and you flub up the development phases, by the time you get to retention, you could pretty much guess that you either going to have to throw the whole checkbook at somebody to get them to stay, or you're going to be fighting them to leave. And neither of those is healthy. There is a balance in retention, and retention is closely connected to rewards and recognition, because retention isn't solely money. It isn't solely job titles. It is everything from, do I get to have 2 hours off on Wednesdays to go take my kid to soccer practice? Because I've made it up and will make it up on either end. Retention is understanding that maybe someone's life situation has changed and they are now responsible for caring for a sick loved one or a parent whose health has changed. So do I have the capacity to go remote for a couple months while I go get my parents settled in a nursing home? Do I have the leverage in the company to work on special assignments? It's funny, Disney keep coming up today, so I'm gonna just roll with it. But there was a process in Disney where you could go for an internal assignment on another team, and you would apply for the job and interview for it just like anything else. But you could leave your team for 6 months, 12 months, or something like that to go work on this special assignment elsewhere in the company. And there were quite a few people who transitioned, and sometimes it was lateral move, sometimes it would be considered like a promotion, and then maybe sometimes they would stay, sometimes they would come back to the team. But that created a sense of purpose in the company because you never completely felt like locked in. And I think that was a really good aha moment for me because there's always something else to do. We never know what all things people are working on. Sometimes folks are in school or training programs and they just didn't tell you. Sometimes people have worked second jobs to build a skill set and they never told you. And so retention is an opportunity to look at all the ways that someone could grow and expand while still being in the comfort of your company, which takes us to separation. It is possible to separate with dignity. I think a lot of times we're so used to bad separations that feel like ugly divorces, but you can separate with class. You can separate with dignity. You can absolutely choose to walk away from a role, from a company, and there is a level of mutual respect. Now, that depends on what you've done in the other 5 phases. Because again, if you flubbed up on board and you mistreated people in the development opportunities and didn't offer them to them, you just threw them a couple crumbs in the retention phase, and now you're like, well, why are you leaving? You're not going to have too much mutual respect. But when you recognize the benefits that both parties have provided to one another, that's how you can accomplish that. And like I said, that is agnostic of how the person leaves. There are some jobs that it was a horrible separation, but now looking back, I'm like, you know what? I got to do some pretty cool things there. All right, I can work with that. So again, how can we seek to find that mutual respect and acknowledgement of mutual benefit? So now let's talk about the functional areas, and I need the book for that because it's 12 of them, and I'm not even going to try to memorize all of this. So the 12 HR functional areas are talent acquisition, compensation and benefits, learning and development, human resources business partnership, HR analytics, HR information systems or HRIS, employee relations and compliance, risk management, HR operations, HR communications, diversity and inclusion, and organizational development. Now, I'm not going to spend the whole episode because that would take like another 40 minutes. But just know the point I really want to bring out here. I want to talk about HR frenemies. That's a section in the book. And I put that part, I put buddy pairs in the book as well as some HR frenemies. And I put that in there because a lot of times, especially at smaller companies, when we think of HR, it's like 1 or 2 people or 5 at the most. And so a lot of times because HR is so understaffed, we don't see all of the functional areas. And keep in mind, within each of those 12 functional areas, there are multiple levels. So the person who is doing the strategy development work for it may not be the same person doing the operations work, which may not be the same person doing the reporting work. So really, if you think about the 12 functional areas, at a minimum, you might be doing the work of like 36 to 40 people. That's a lot of tasks. Now, some of this can be outsourced. Some of it can be automated, but a lot of it needs a person there in the role. And we don't always staff HR appropriately, but I'm going to get off my soapbox about that. All my HR folks, you can feel me. Let's talk about these frenemy pairs. So the first is HR analytics and employee relations and compliance. Because HR analytics is very data focused, is numbers focused, employee relations is almost like a polar opposite of that because it needs the deep dive and it needs the subjective data and information of the why behind it. Sometimes HR analytics is way too cold for the level of detail and nuance that employee relations and compliance requires. And so, first of all, and this applies to a lot actually of the frenemy pairs, I would not suggest that you staff the same person to do both of those functions because it requires a very different part of your brain, to be honest. But it also can create privacy nightmares because if you think about an employee engagement survey or an employee satisfaction survey, if it comes out that there is a manager who is harassing folks on their team, you want the privacy and the discretion of employee relations to handle that, not HR analytics, which is just going over the survey results. The next frenemy pair is going to be TA or talent acquisition and HR business partners. This happens a lot, in the way both functions show up now is very much a numbers game. And it's unfortunate because I think that both of them could benefit greatly from being much more relationship focused. I'm not going to name the company, but I had an experience working for a company where both their TA and HRBP functions were just all numbers. And it was so detached and impersonal. And I struggled, to be completely honest, in my role because I was always trying to figure out the deeper why and well, why not this? And have you thought about this? And it was so irritating to the people in those roles because they were like, well, what does the number say? We just need to get somebody in this role. What's the timeline to hire? What's the timeline to, get people offboarded in this risk? And for me, it's so much deeper than that because people are deeper than that. People are nuanced. People have layers and they have these different perspectives that add color and dimension to how they show up at work. Why I listed them as frenemies, though, is because often they're fighting for the same people. So HRBPs, they're fighting to either maintain or shift the workforce within a particular unit or department. And TA is trying to pull people into roles. And so I've seen it many times where the HRBPs are trying desperately to hold on to somebody and they throw in the book and trying to figure out and finagle all these ways. And TA is doing their thing to try to get somebody to move. And if there is not alignment, mutual respect, and trust between the two functions, and that needs to happen at a leadership level that directs that, you're going to find people fighting against each other for no real reason. And the fallout is going to be that people probably will end up leaving the company because if you're an HRBP that's fighting to keep somebody in a role and TA is trying to move somebody into a role and it's a promotion or a title jump or a raise attached to it, and then they end up not getting that role, they are not going to be happy in that. I've had that happen. I've seen it happen to other people. It's not good. So again, leaders have to intervene oftentimes to create some cohesion between talent acquisition and human resource business partners. There are other frenemy pairs, but I'll pause there because I want you to read it in the book. But I just want to reiterate the purpose of me describing the frenemies is to highlight the fact that, again, HR has these 12 distinct disciplines. They do not always play nice with each other. Their work is sometimes incongruent. And if, as an organizational leader, you have not carefully created and managed the architecture of your overall HR function, you will find that one department and one functional area will undermine the other. So with that being said, what has been your experiences with HR? What has people work meant to you and for you in your career? Has it been good? Has it been frustrating? Has it been fulfilling? Do you feel like it has added positive value or do you feel like it has frustrated your work experiences? Let me know down in the comments. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next episode. Bye, Dream.